Okay, we're here adding smaller and smaller branches to this tree. Now if you get the branches wet, as I did here, I don't know if you can tell, these are wet, that's why I had it laying down, to try to form the branches, you cannot use any tape. So I wouldn't suggest you doing these small branches wet as you go up until you have taped the paper onto it first. So do you remember what the thing was about the paper? Smaller pieces of paper are used. Well, this looks like a strip, I know, but just something like this to add a branch on, okay? You can just kind of, loosely tangle it up a little bit where you can even bend it up like that and make a piece that you can add to it. So I'll do it to this dry one right here. Okay, so see how that's open on the end? All I gotta do is stick it in there like that and tape it, which once again I don't have my tape ready. Okay, let me stop this a second. So remember that the algorithm of the tree's growth is the Y, but it's not a perfect Y. It comes out different every time. So we're going to we're gonna bring this branch up a little taller. A little more height to it. So I just took a piece of paper to attach. Make sure that you overlap the paper when you're attaching. If you don't have a pocket to tuck it in, usually you can figure out a place to overlap it. Okay, so I'm going to get this ready. Remember, if it gets wet, you just have to let it dry and then you can add more. So when that happens, and see how that's all wide and bulky? Remember, y'all have had paper in your fingers before and you press and press and press it until it's in a little tiny shape. Well, that's how this works. You don't want to press it all in at the beginning, because then you don't have any pockets. You don't have any, everything's all compressed. So you do that as you go, and that's how your branches get smaller and smaller, is through compression of the paper as well as using less paper. Now another thing will happen, and you're attaching these branches up here to make the Ys. If you add a whole bunch of tape, think about what's going to happen. As you're working with your armature now, tape is a little heavier than paper, or if you put a lot of tape on there, it gets too heavy. Okay, so you want to keep this as lightweight as you can, and this will, when you finish this structure of a tree, it will be very lightweight, but it will be strong because you've gone diagonally, and it will hold together real powerfully strong, and it will surprise you how strong it can be. Okay. Okay, here's an example of what I mean about strong. This is paper mache that was done just like this tree. Okay, it's the form of a cat. You see how hard it is, how strong it is? Can't even bend those ears. Okay, now it was finished out by covering it with magazine paper. I even found some cat eyes in the magazine, just try to make it realistic a little bit. So it is hard as a rock and will last many, many, many years, just like ceramics will. Okay. You can paint paper mache too, but I don't recommend painting it necessarily. It's not always the best way. I think using paper to finish it with, colored paper, especially the thinner the paper, the better. If you use thick paper, it looks horrible because thick paper shows edges, because it's thick. You want thin paper that'll mesh down and melt into that's the reason you tear strips. You never cut with a sharp edge with scissors, and then when you put those down, those sharp edges just show. So by tearing the paper, and it gives a frayed edge, those frayed edges meld into each other with the liquid substance, okay? Also, your tree should be able to stand up on its own, and so sometimes you want to press down to make sure it's balanced, okay? And let it dry that way as a trunk, because if you lay it down this way to dry, there's pressure being applied to that, and it changes just a little bit. So you want this to be kept flat. I had a form I made one time of a little girl, and she had boots on, I kept having to make the boots bigger and bigger and bigger to get her to stand up. And what it was the bottom of it was puffed out too much and it was rocking, you know. So you want to make sure it's flat and level. You can also support by adding around it like this. Remember how to do the strips. I mean, not the strips, but the forms. Forms are when you take the paper, the newspaper, and let's do it this way to make a, well, it's too little of a strip really, but kind of twist it, and you got a form to work with. There it is. Let's get it into a form. There's a form. It's a messy form, but it's a form. You would never want to, remember like we talked about, and make a fold a flat piece of paper like that, and fold it again flat, and stick it on there as a form. That does not look like a form. It's got to have some body to it. That's the reason for the looseness. It leaves that air up inside, which makes a form. Because a form has volume. Form has space inside of it. So when you're making forms, you got to have forms. Alright, so now this dry piece, since I've already got it formed right here, it would be a great addition to this piece. Just slide it in there in place and let that stay for a minute. Okay, I went ahead and took these wet things off that were hanging there, and I'm going to, like I told y'all to do, work with it when it's dry. So if these are going to branch off into Y's, I've got to attach paper and leave it with the sections, you know, just like we did with the main trunk. I'm making little mini trunks over and over and over again, just getting them smaller and smaller every time. So this piece that's coming up right here, it's got to be another sprout to the side, right, to make a Y. This piece is coming up right here, needs a sprout to the side, sprout to the side, and the sprout's got to be smaller. If it's bigger than these, the tree's going to fall over, and it looks weird. They don't grow. That's not how they grow. An algorithm is repetitive. It keeps copying the main shape over and over and over. And the main shape was the Y, and it just keeps copying a version of it in a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller way. So amazing. Nature is so amazing. All right, so that is your lesson, and that is not completed by any means. I'll try to do a part 2 to finish this, but I may not. This is Thanksgiving week, and I've enjoyed being with you. Happy Thanksgiving. By the way, don't put glue into liquid starch. It turns into putty. Okay, here's another technique I want to show you. I call it adding puffs of paper. So I've taken this little piece of paper and I've puffed it around into a little puff shape, and I'm gonna build this up on the side. So I'm gonna it's kind of like putting a patch on something. You see the form of this is sort of sunk in right there. So I'm gonna bring that out by putting this down, and then I'll put strips over it, and it just widens that up. Also, I know it's going to be needed to support this heavy branch right here. So I put the puff right there, put strips over it, and that makes the tree more secure, more strength to it, because it is going to be weak right there where it was skinny. Got to hold up that branch. Okay, more later. Okay, well, I might as well let you see me putting strips over it. You see how I'm going diagonal over to hold that one down there. It's kind of like putting a big X over it. And since this is a big trunk part of the tree, I'm using larger strips. Now remember, you can always tear strips once they're on here to make them lay down flat, whereas you want them, if you want them to. Okay, so that puff is in place right there. I brought that tree out, just a little bit of a lump on that side, which is interesting because trees are like that. You know, they have knots and all kinds of interesting shapes. Every tree is unique, just like every person is unique. That's why I love to do this kind of thing and build forms. It teaches you so much about nature and the pattern of nature, the rhythm of nature. We always think drawing things is so hard, but if you look at nature closely, you'll see that it's a repetition. Find the pattern, and it'll help you in drawing forms. Okay, forms that have parts. There's usually a pattern. If it's nature, there's always a pattern. Okay, so that's that piece that was wet that did not work up there. Okay. Now I also added a little bit down here. You know how trees sometimes have a little rolling bit of, I just stick that on there too. Rolling bit of root that comes up near the tree like that. And that will help support it, see, when it's standing up as well. Okay. I guess that's all I'm going to video, and when the tree is finished, I will show it to you. Let me know of any problems you have. You're doing this at home. Looking online for paper mache may not help you much with this process, this technique, because this is different than what you see online. They recommend wadding it up real tight and hard and putting balls of paper together and stuff like that, and I don't do it that way because I like it to have a natural feel to it. So I like to have that sponginess to the paper that you can push and pull and tape differently. So the paper mache itself has got to be the shell that gets it hard, but the paper form should be squishy and malleable like clay. Okay, let me know if you need any help.